Hello. All right. Okay, here we are. Hey there. Hey, animal allies. I'm just waiting a minute or so as folks have a chance to join us before we get started. Um, but I thought I would mention sort of the big deal, kind of big news of the day before we start is that did you all hear about the big win for ducks in Gainesville, Florida? You can check out our social media posts, but in case you haven't heard, in 1 year's time, Gainesville animal defenders and grassroots activists successfully pressured every restaurant in the city of Gainesville to stop serving foie gras. No legislation, just strategic and sustained campaigning. As far as we know, Gainesville is the first city in the world that has gone foie gras free through pressure campaigning alone. This is what strategic grassroots action can accomplish for animals, right? That's what's possible. That's why we are here learning and sharing with each other. And so, a huge congratulations to Gainesville Animal Defenders on history being made. Be sure to follow them and support them, whatever they take on next. And, certainly kudos for them, but kudos for the ducks and the geese, the animals. It's a big day. And we want that to continue. So, how freaking amazing is that? Go ahead and comment if you want in the comment section about that. If you heard about it, what you think about that. And we're going to get started now. So, let's get started. Welcome, one and all. Say hello again in the chat. And what activism did you participate in this week? Feel free to share that in the comment section. We're talking about a new ballot initiative tonight with David Michelson. So we're going to get to that. Very exciting. Before we start our program, my name is Michelle Granberg. I'm a mentor and team member with Animal Activism Collective. For those new to AAC, AAC is a multinational program created to encourage activists by helping them reach their potential and equip them with the tools, community, and resources they need to boldly participate in our global animal liberation movement. Founded in 2020, AAC offers a free 3-month mentorship program which pairs experienced activists with aspiring activists. You can apply today to become a mentor or a mentee through our website. Plus, we are more than a mentorship program. We offer free educational live streams and online trainings. We have a podcast called the Animal Liberation Hour. And if you listen, please comment, I listen to the podcast in the comment section. And we host large scale in-person collaborative activism events around the country. We are a support system and a resource designed to empower grassroots activism of all kinds. And a reminder, our next in-person event, the Ohio occurrence in and around Cleveland, is August 29th through 31st, 2025. And we'll put info in the comments and you can check that on our social media as well. So moving on to our program, we're joined by David Michelson. He's going to tell us about a current ballot initiative that is aimed at banning all injury, killing, and breeding of animals in Oregon by removing every exemption for these acts. But there's more to it than that, of course. So we'll invite your questions as we go. Please keep your questions relevant to the topic. And okay, welcome, David. Go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate it so much. And thank you everyone who is watching now. And thank you to whoever is watching later as well. So my name is David Michelson. I am one of the chief petitioners for a proposed ballot initiative in Oregon that, if passed, would ban the intentional, knowing, and reckless injury of any animal statewide. Animals on farms, animals currently in research labs, animals out in the wild. The way that the initiative works is by taking a look at our pre-existing animal cruelty laws. Oregon is actually ranked as one of the best states in the country, according to the Animal Legal Defense Fund, for our animal cruelty protections. But when they're doing that analysis, they're looking at companion animals. That's really the only animals that are protected across the board in all the states that have cruelty laws. They're the real focus. Our cruelty law in Oregon, in particular, has protections against things like abuse, neglect, and sexual assault. Those all make sense. We don't want animals to be abused, neglected, or assaulted. But when we look at the definition, there's something really interesting that we find. Animal abuse is defined as the intentional, knowing, and reckless injury of an animal. To me, that's a common sense definition. To you all, that might be a common sense definition. But of course, you might notice we intentionally injure animals all the time when we slaughter them in slaughterhouses, when we experiment on them in labs, when we hunt them in the wild, when we exterminate them, when we think that they're invasive, when we do really anything that's serving our purpose to non-companion animals. We intentionally injure them all the time, and that's not considered animal cruelty under the law. That is because in Oregon and in every other state that has animal cruelty laws, there are a list of exemptions. The format of these exemptions does vary state to state, but they're all there. And in Oregon in particular, we have a state law that lays out a list of activities that are exempt from our cruelty laws. So if it falls into this category, they're not protected from what we define as animal abuse, which is just intentional injury. Slaughtering is not or is exempt. We have research and teaching, which is exempt. We have forms of wildlife management. We have hunting and fishing. We have any activity, basically, that when we are profiting off of killing animals, when we find it beneficial to humans to kill animals, we exempt it. The only animals that are really protected are those companion animals, the ones we keep in our home. These exemptions aren't species specific, to be clear, and I think it is important to distinguish. If someone had a companion pig, that pig would be protected from animal abuse. You couldn't go, if your neighbor had a pig, you couldn't go and kill that pig, right? That would be considered cruel animal abuse. But they are environmental exemptions. So if they're in your home, if you're treating them like a companion, they're safe. But if they're out on a farm, they're not safe. So that's also why you can experiment on dogs in testing labs. That's not considered animal cruelty in Oregon or other states as well. What this initiative does, quite simply, it removes those exemptions from our animal cruelty code. And it just says now, if it's intentional injury, it's abuse. The only two exemptions that would exist, one is for self-defense, which we just sort of clarify. That exists when it comes to human laws as well, right? When we are defending ourselves, if violent force is necessary or if force is necessary, that is treated differently under the law. If it's genuinely, and we made sure the language is very clear, imminent and present danger, protecting your life or someone else's life. The other exemption is any veterinary practice. So that's a pre-existing exemption that would protect things like spaying and neutering, as well as vet-administered euthanasia. We didn't want to impact those practices because we do believe, at least in principle, if not always in practice, those veterinary procedures are intended to benefit the animal. The other exemptions were to benefit us, and I don't think those are exemptions we want to have. So that's, simply speaking, how the initiative works. And it might be helpful actually to share a little bit about what ballot initiatives are in general, just really briefly. Not every state in the US has them, but about half do. It's essentially a way for any citizen to put forward legislation, and the citizens write it themselves. If they go around and collect enough signatures from registered voters in that state, then that law will be voted on in the next election cycle. And if 50% of people vote for it, then it passes and it gets implemented. People might have heard about a lot of these in the news. Oftentimes, a lot of progressive policies will get passed through the ballot initiative process. Some not progressive things also happen to get passed in the ballot initiative process, unfortunately. But in Oregon in particular, we have quite a record of passing some pretty bold initiatives. And so we are trying to take that tradition and use it for the animal rights movement. In particular, we are really inspired by the women's suffrage movement, which used the ballot initiative process to get the right to vote. So in Oregon, our ballot initiative process really started with being part of the women's suffrage movement. When the suffragettes were trying to get the right to vote, there were essentially two large organizations, ones that focused on state level rights and ones that focused on the national rights. And they were intertwined because they found that the more states that were either voting on or passing legislation to protect their right to vote or to give them the right to vote, it made it much easier to fight for a national, the 19th Amendment of the United States. In Oregon, it took 6 attempts before that ballot initiative finally passed, giving women the right to vote in Oregon. 6 attempts. The first time, I think it got maybe 22 or 28% of the vote, somewhere around there. So it was unfortunately very handily defeated, but they didn't stop. They were persistent. They kept going. After 6 attempts, it finally passed in Oregon. There were other states that had that many attempts. There were some states that had fewer attempts. In total, it was around 54, I believe, ballot initiatives. Vast majority of them did not end up passing, but it built a culture where everyone was talking about women's rights. There's even a short quote that I think illustrates this from the women's suffrage movement. They have a history of women's suffrage volume, like 6 volume book. Very helpful if anyone's really interested in learning about that movement. They said that it's safe to say that from the middle of January 1877 until the following October, the most prominent theme of public discussion was the question of suffrage for women. Miners discussed it around their campfires. Freighters on their long, slow journeys over the mountain trails argued pro and con whether they should let women have the ballot. I really like this because that's what we want for the animal rights movement. We want everyone. I want truck drivers talking over the radio about whether they should give animals the right not to be killed. I think that would be a huge win. I mean, there aren't as many miners now, but I want everyone working in every sector, right, to be talking about whether we want to grant animals the right not to be killed in the United States. It first starting in Oregon, but this is a broader question. So that kind of gets a little bit to our theory of change. Hopefully, it answers a few questions about ballot initiatives. We are attempting to get on the ballot for 2026. And we have 2 years to collect signatures in Oregon, luckily. It varies how much time you get for signature collection by state. Oregon is one of the few that gives up to 2 years. We started collecting last summer, and we just passed 61,000 signatures so far, which is great. The legal threshold we need to get to is 117,000. We need a little bit more than that because some signatures get thrown out. Just nothing nefarious, just some people aren't actually registered or they don't write their hand or they don't sign legibly, things like that. At least in Oregon. Sometimes I will say, I do believe that there are instances in the news where the process is not as transparent or as benevolent as I think, at least in Oregon, we've had a lot of cooperation with the Secretary of State's office, and I'm happy if someone has questions about those logistics. I probably can't say enough positive things about my experience personally dealing with the elections division in Oregon and just how transparent, how well documented the process has been. But anyway, we have until next July of 2026 to turn in the signatures. If we get enough, we'll be on the ballot. And this could be the first time anyone, anywhere, has had the opportunity to vote on banning the killing of animals. And that's what we want. We want people to vote on this. We want people to be talking about it, to think about it, to question the status quo. And so this tool is just, I think, a very useful way to do that. I went on a little longer than I thought. I'm curious if there's any initial questions that I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, questions. We can have some questions just about what David just shared in terms of a little bit of a general overview of ballot initiatives, what questions are coming up for folks, and and do you agree? I certainly agree. This as a form of just raising awareness and getting these issues in front of people's eyes, even if it doesn't go all the way to becoming a legal law there. But
Yeah.
what, David, what, because I also see when I was looking about this a little bit, the word referendum, is that it's a
Hmm.
little different than a ballot initiative, or is that the same? And yeah,
Yeah. That's a great question. I think that oftentimes when I see those two words, they mean something slightly different. referendum is more often used in Europe, and it's usually a countrywide vote. So, like Brexit, when the UK decided to leave the EU, that was a referendum, and it was a nationwide vote. For the US, I don't think that language is as often used, at least formally speaking. It is a very similar process. It's just a vote at the statewide level, and we don't have a national referendum process in the US, although I think that'd be such a cool form of direct democracy if we did. Um, the other terms that sometimes get talked about are the difference between a bill and an initiative. A bill is a specific law that's formed by legislators. And so this is not a bill in that sense. It is still a law, it's an act,
Mm,
but it would be voted on by voters and it's written by voters. So that's what distinguishes it. Um, the
yeah.
other terms that come around a lot is proposition, initiative, petition, measure. Those are all the same thing. So it just varies by state. In California, they call them propositions. In Oregon, they call them measures. In, I think, Massachusetts, they call them questions. Those are all the same terms, just for anything that is qualified to the ballot.
Mm. Thank you for that. I feel like I should have paid more attention in civics class or something, right? It's sort of where people learn it if they take that class, but I'm definitely raise my hand and say I'm one of very ignorant when it comes to this and love to learn about this. You
Yeah,
mentioned, and we're open for questions right now about this right now.
cool.
And we have one actually.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah. So John Bell wants to know, so this would apply only to Oregon, and would it stop animal agriculture and slaughter for food
Yeah,
that you're
so
proposing?
yes, so it does apply just to Oregon. Unfortunately, with the ballot initiative process, it is just state by state. We do hope long term that we can create an organization that can launch these in multiple states that have ballot initiative processes. And then, I mean, we know that this is unlikely to pass in 2026. No one on the campaign really thinks that this has a high chance of passing right now, right? But our goal is to create a organization, a base that can do this in Oregon, multiple election cycles in a row, to do this in other states, so that in decades, I mean, over 10, 20, 30, 40 years, it took the women's suffrage movement between like 40 to 50 years from the first ballot initiative to getting the 19th Amendment. So I think we have it's a long game. But in theory, if it passed right now, it would pass just in Oregon, and it would ban slaughtering animals for food. So slaughterhouses would get shut down. You couldn't have permits for slaughtering. You couldn't have permits for fishing operations. You couldn't have permits for testing labs. Structurally speaking, all of those things would be banned because the state can't legally permit an illegal activity. And that, I think, is also just an important thing to get at. We we know that there will still be, almost certainly, and unfortunately, people who are killing animals, even if this were to pass, especially if this were to pass right now, when a lot of the culture hasn't changed. And as an aside, what's nice about the ballot initiative process is it only passes when 50% of people want it to pass. And so structurally speaking, we really need to get public support. This is a way to eventually get that level of support. The world will look so different, I think, by the time 50% of Oregonians don't want to kill animals anymore. I think we already won't be killing a lot of animals by then, which is great. Um, but there will still be some amount of illegal killing of animals, and we're not trying to focus on like individual incarceration. We actually created, and I'm happy to share more about this as well, in the initiative itself, an alternative to incarceration. We wanted to try to get at something that's more of a restorative justice practice when it comes to individuals who are killing animals. The bigger issue that we're really trying to do is just structurally, like let's stop the state from allowing all of this violence to happen. Then most of it goes away. Um, that was a bit of a tangent, but hopefully it was still helpful.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, um, I just want to read a comment that we have and a question
Yeah.
there, but a book recommendation I suggest on activism about perseverance and legislation is Brooklyn Goes Home: The Rise and Fall of American Greyhound Racing and the Dog That Inspired a Movement, right? Was that a ballot initiative? Why? I know that's anyway, that there's no longer dog racing, but Let me go on to the question, which is,
Yeah, yeah.
I would assume that the meat and dairy industry would attack this effort. Would we need to have a legal defense? And I was going to ask too, like what,
Mm.
obviously you're going to get pushback. Do you anticipate specific types of pushback from the industries? You know, how would that look? And did you follow, wasn't it Denver, the ballot initiative to ban fur? Am
Hmm.
I remembering it in 2024 around in November? And did you learn anything from them as well?
Yeah, so I definitely was following the campaigns in Denver to ban fur and to ban slaughterhouses within the city,
That's
and
right.
also the Sonoma County ballot initiative to ban factory farms there. I think that there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from those campaigns. The one that I think I talk most about is the Sonoma County one, actually, because their initiative, by banning factory farms, what they found on the ground during the campaign season is that the opposition messaging, they got to do two things that I think were kind of, um, or I'll leave my judgments aside. They got to say two things in the messaging. One of them is that they acknowledged bad things happen on factory farms, but that those bad things are really happening outside of Sonoma County. So they kind of got to make it seem like they agreed with the messaging in some respects, but that's just misdirected. The Compassionate Bay, DXE, their attention is just being misdirected on somewhere else. The other thing they got to say is that every farm in Sonoma County, not every farm, but a lot of farms in Sonoma counties would be affected by this,
Mhm.
essentially saying they're all factory farms, right? And those two things sound contradictory. They're all factory farms, and none of them are factory farms. None of the bad stuff's happening here. So a lot of the conversation was around this definition of what is factory farming. And that's not the conversation that I'm trying to stimulate among the public. I want to stimulate, should we be killing animals? And what's nice about that, about our initiative, the way that it's formulated, killing an animal isn't ambiguous. It's an action. People know what that means, right? You have to admit we're killing animals in these situations. Do we want to be doing that? Yes or no, rather than what specific form it's taking. Um, I think that is one of the biggest takeaways that I have around messaging, which to get to that uh, initial question, I do think we're going to have to be able to respond to very specific messaging from Farm Bureau, from hunting associations, from OHSU, which is the Oregon Health and Sciences University that runs the National Primate Research Center, which has been under a lot of pressure recently to close down their primate research lab. I think some very successful campaigning is happening. We're actually, when we're collecting signatures, we'll often come across people who are like, oh, will this impact the primate lab? And they're asking it because they want it to, not because they don't want it to, which is a really nice change. Normally, when we get like, oh, would this impact hunting? They usually don't want us to say yes, unfortunately. But with the primate lab, people are pretty opposed to it right now, which is um, awesome. I So those different groups will definitely have messages that this is going to be bad for the economy, that this is going to be bad for um,
Mhm.
different different groups. Especially, I think one thing they did in Denver, they portrayed the campaign to ban the slaughterhouse as being racist and anti, um, I think specifically Hispanic. And what was interesting is that the one district that actually had the highest, I think it was the highest Hispanic population, was the one segment of Denver. I forget, district is not the right word, but segment of Denver that voted in favor of the slaughter ban, the ones living in the community itself. So, of course, the messaging was not truthful. It was not based in reality, but they used that messaging anyway. They'll certainly use that messaging for us. They'll probably do a lot of fear around you won't be able to protect yourself, you won't be able to feed yourself, you won't be able to X, Y, and Z. I think the best way that we can respond to that is to be able to present alternative strategies to get those same needs met without killing animals. Because at the end of the day, I really do believe that everyone is trying to do things in an attempt to meet their needs. They are often using strategies that I very much dislike, that I think are incredibly violent, that I think are at the expense of the needs of animals. But I do want everyone to get those needs met. And so we need to both, I really want to both empathize with those needs and present them with a strategy. So when it comes to medical testing, is I think the easiest example because we have quite a long list now of alternative ways of doing medicine that don't involve animal experimentation. And we usually give them in our campaigning. So with the primate lab, I think even the governor of Oregon at one point mentioned, I think it was Harvard, they shut down their primate lab. They're using something else now. Why can't we do that? Like it's the alternatives are already accepted. We have organs on a chip, we have live tissue that's been cultivated, and like if you're testing drugs on real human tissue, that's going to be much more effective than on an animal that is not human tissue. Um, so presenting alternative forms of agriculture, highlighting those farm transitions that we have. I know that there have been some successful transitions specifically from chicken farming to mushroom farming. I think that's going to be our most effective messaging is highlighting what the transition looks like. As far as legal, um, being prepared for legal battles, that I don't think we'll have to worry about right now because the only way that someone would have standing to sue or to fight the initiative would be if it passed, and we do not think it's going to pass in 2026. We're certainly going to campaign for it because we want it to, and we think that's part of generating the conversation. But I think it is a long game, and so until it passes, there's not really any further legal challenge that can be made. Most of that process where you could have like appealed the initiative for meeting certain constitutional requirements, that actually already happened and passed quite a long time ago in the process. When in Oregon, you start out with an initiative, you submit the full text, you collect 1,000 signatures just to kind of meet a minimum threshold so that that triggers sort of the review process. That way, they don't have to review every initiative that gets submitted because some people do submit a lot of initiatives that don't really intend to pursue them. Um, but once we do that, the Attorney General reviews the initiative, the Secretary of State's office, they review it, they give a summary of it, they say whether or not it meets just a few basic criteria. They don't have to necessarily say that it's perfect, but they just have to check off a couple things. And then there is a way for you to appeal their decision and to appeal the summary language. All of that is taken care of. So at least in the short term, I don't think we have any major legal battles to worry about. It's mostly messaging that I think is our big concern.
Nice, very informative. So this may be kind of my own silly, ignorance question here, but so you're saying if hypothetically, if the ban was voted in, that would make those actions a crime? And who decides the
Yes.
punishment? I know that's down the road. Would it be a misdemeanor? I guess that would be up for the courts to decide what that would look like.
That's a great question. And it's something that we have put a lot of effort into because so it would become a crime killing an animal for any reason other than that self-defense exemption I mentioned and veterinary practices in particular. It would be considered a crime of animal abuse, just like any current animal abuse crimes, which typically are misdemeanors. They occasionally can get up to felonies, although the way we worded the initiative, we actually made that more difficult because we really are trying to show to people our intention is not to criminalize individual behavior in the same way that our focus is really more on the system. And by broadening the scope of who is protected, we just thought we will try to kind of keep it at the level of misdemeanor, but we also added a route that would avoid incarceration entirely or criminal penalties. And we used something kind of similar to what is occasionally done with drug reform policy. Essentially, that instead of a misdemeanor, an individual can agree to an ownership prohibition. So they will be prohibited from owning animals for a period of time of any species. So if they are committed for injuring an animal, prohibited from owning an animal for a number of years, depending on the severity of the crime. And they would engage in supervised community service around animal care. I do emphasize
Hmm.
supervised. So if they were to harm a companion animal, they would then actually be supervised to take care in a like a humane society, trying to help out with dogs and cats who are in shelter. The idea, this is a very idealistic vision, but we really do think that empathy and this is actually really well documented. Empathy is always developed when you engage with the population who you currently struggle to empathize with. And so when we have human individuals who have prejudice against other human individuals, if you put them together, and if you, in particular, put them in a situation where they have to be somewhat collaborative, that will tend to reduce that prejudice, discrimination, and increase empathy and understanding. And so we're trying to have something similar to that, where, okay, it's clear that we just need to connect those human beings with those animals in a way that fosters empathy. And we built this system again, knowing it's very idealistic, um, to really demonstrate that we just want a world where we don't kill animals anymore. We're not trying to put everyone in jail. We want everyone to get their needs met and to understand that animals have needs. That is the biggest goal of this campaign, is to say animals have needs. We want them to be protected under the law, those needs. How do we get everyone to recognize that they have those needs? Um, but it would officially be a crime. It would be a crime of animal abuse, or animal neglect, or animal sexual assault. So um, we don't talk about it as often, but animal sexual assault, any forced contact with an animal's mouth, anus, or genitals would be considered animal sexual assault. That includes artificial insemination. So the breeding practices would also be banned if
Mhm.
this initiative were to pass.
Wow. Wow. It does paint a picture. Even if it's a fantasy, wishful thinking, I think it's important still to envision this and to
Yeah,
shoot high and raise the bar in this. And somebody's got to say it and somebody's got to try and fail a bunch of times so that eventually, yeah, maybe our children's children's children, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe, maybe, I mean, Wayne Chung always, he really says he thinks all these things are gonna happen. The laws are gonna change in our lifetime. So I'm gonna go with that. Okay,
yeah.
question here, which is, I mean, obviously there's no coincidence between, the progressiveness of Oregon in general. Uh, was it strategic to choose doing this in Oregon? Is it historically a pro-animal state? In
Mm.
other words, would you recommend to people who are thinking about this in their state before going forth putting a ballot initiative forward, should they consider their local leaning, you know,
Yeah, I
conservative, not or progressive kinds of scale?
it certainly makes sense to consider the environment that we're in. For this initiative, it was just simply where I was living, and I'm very fortunate to have moved and been living before I had the idea for this campaign in a state that is so, I think it has a fairly well developed process for ballot initiatives. I think it could certainly be more democratic. I think that there are certainly improvements that can be made, but I think for by and large, Oregon is a state that, like I mentioned earlier, structurally speaking, the elections division, the Secretary of State's office, I think they make the process easier to understand than other states, at least by comparison. I also think the general public is more supportive of ballot initiatives in Oregon than in other states. And the example that I can give, when I was petitioning for one of the other initiatives I didn't mention earlier, but that was in the most recent election, was Berkeley's ban on factory farming, which did pass, a moratorium, or not just a moratorium, I think a full ban. And there weren't any active at the time it passed, but now there will not be any in the future, which is great. Um, I was collecting signatures for that a couple summers ago, and there were a lot of people who were like, I'm fed up with ballot initiatives. I don't even, they just did not like it at all. They said, that's the legislator's job. I don't want to do their job. That's why they're in office. And I think from their perspective in California, there usually are a lot more ballot initiatives. And I used to live in California, and I voted a couple times in California. I do remember myself even seeing some initiatives that seemed so, some of them seemed really inconsequential, especially at the local level, and they were really technical, kind of convoluted. And then you just had a bunch of other ones that you had to read through. And so I think even though I love the ballot initiative process, I can understand why someone might feel worn out, and not as excited about it. Whereas in Oregon, there are usually only a handful of initiatives at the state level every election cycle, and they're usually pretty important, and substantial is maybe what I'll say. In our last election cycle, we had an initiative on ranked choice voting, on they called the Oregon rebate, which would have taxed sales on corporations to give everyone essentially a UBI of sorts. The year prior to that, we had a gun regulation that passed. The year before that, we had drug decriminalization and psilocybin legalization. Not all of these were wildly popular among everyone, but we really only had a handful that were talked about a lot. They got a lot of people involved in the process. And so just a far different environment. When we're out collecting signatures for our initiative, and I've collected signatures for other initiatives in Oregon, people are pretty just excited to sign things. They're like, oh, get it on the ballot. Yeah, let's talk about it, even if they don't support it. And so in our own case, we have had hunters sign the initiative that would end up banning hunting. They knew it would ban hunting. We've talked to them about it, but they will sign because they think it's worthwhile to have the conversation. And that is a theme that's echoed among most people that we talk to, that, okay, it's to get it on the ballot. Even if I disagree, I think it's an important sort of process to go through. Um,
Yeah.
so, oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so great. And it leads into this next question, which is, yeah, can you talk a little more about why it's so important to put it forth anyway? Like you're saying, even though you know it won't pass, and you just spoke to that. And I was also thinking it gets more wide scale media attention. So can you talk a bit about that, like the role of the media, hopeful for the media as it relates?
Yeah, I think these have the potential to get national, if not international coverage, especially something of this magnitude. It's just so unheard of. It's so novel. We hope that when we get on the ballot, the media coverage will do two things. One is that it'll broadcast the fact that we're even doing this among people who might already support it. So I know I run into animal rights activists quite frequently, especially over the past, in May, there were a couple of conferences I was attending, and a lot of people had not heard of what we're doing. Many had, but a lot had not. And I think there's a lot of people out there who, when hearing about us, might already support us and want to get involved. And so it's one way that we can broadcast just a broad signal to see who can join our base, who can join our organization, so that we can be more successful in doing this in 2028, in 2030, in 2032. I also think that it'll broadcast a huge signal among the general public, and that, like I mentioned earlier, it'll get people talking about, do we want to be killing animals or not, as opposed to some of the other conversations, both the more technical, like on the forms of killing, but also a lot of conversation among animal advocacy focuses on veganism and diet change. And I certainly support both of those things. I also want people to be talking about animal rights in a civic political context. I want it to be really clear that these are rights that we could choose to give or not give, and that we're currently choosing not to give them. I think there's some good research by Pax Fauna, which is the um,
Mm.
sister organization to Pro Animal Future that ran the Denver initiatives, that talks a lot about the importance of shifting from a more consumer-oriented mindset when you're engaging in advocacy towards a more civic mindset, that it empowers people. The real benefit of that is they can feel like they can make a more collective change in the world, that it's not so overwhelming. And it doesn't come with some of the baggage. In a consumer mindset, we're so often very passive. Whereas in a civic mindset, we're much more active, we're engaged, we can take things on. So I'm kind of hoping that an initiative like this being broadcast to enough people will shift the narrative around animal rights in a helpful or productive capacity. Um, I realize I did want to mention actually one other thing briefly about just states in general. Oregon has 2 years to collect signatures, so that is also a benefit. There are not a lot of states that do that. Arizona and Florida are two that come to mind. Weather is also really important to think about for petitioning. Rainy weather is not the best. And surprisingly, it does not rain here as much as people, I think, say that it does, which is great. But just as considerations for where to go, I really think Arizona is a great state, and I always plug it because it has 2 years to collect signatures, and even though it's hot, it doesn't rain that much, which is unfortunate for the people living there, but it is helpful petitioning weather.
Something to keep in mind
Yeah,
for those of us who live in, yeah, snowy states or rainy states or something, or something like
yeah,
that. All right, so
yeah.
there's a question around, and I'm sort of going to paraphrase here for folks who are listening who want to get involved, obviously, but they don't live in Oregon, which may be most of the people listening. Um, how, sort of two-part, how can we branch out to non-vegans and bring this more to non-vegans outside of the echo chamber? And maybe how specifically can we maybe use social media? I mean, because obviously that's the way, if we're not boots to the ground in Oregon, how can we, what can the messaging be through social media? What's been effective in terms of reaching that way?
I think in terms of reaching non-vegans, what I like about this campaign is that those are the people who are most talking about it already. When we got some early news coverage, it was entirely animal agriculture publications who were, I will, I get kind of excited getting to acknowledge that. They would ask me for quotes in response to questions, and they would print them like full quotes. They did not, I think, take what I was saying out of context. I really do appreciate that they seemed very genuinely to want to portray at least what we were advocating for. And I'm specifically talking more about the news organizations, not necessarily. There are also blogs that talk about us, and I haven't gone through those in as much rigor, but. Um, the people talking about our campaign are largely outside of the vegan bubble. And so I get really excited that that's a demonstration this does reach people who we want to most to reach. Um, so that, and we also do have a number of people who have petitioned for the campaign who are not themselves vegan. Vast majority of us are, and we do want to make sure that everyone who's petitioning for the campaign is aware of what this initiative does, that they support the initiative. They want to see a world where there are not animals being killed, including for food, hunting, experimentation. But there are people who they have not made those individual behavior choices yet. Some of them started on the campaign not having been vegan and transitioned towards vegan. Some didn't transition yet. I still think, though, that by getting them involved in the animal rights movement, that actually builds sort of a habit of taking, like, caring for animals and hoping that that will lead to more personal transformation over the long term. Um, for people not in Oregon getting involved, um, in the campaign specifically, sharing that we exist with people, promoting it both to vegans and non-vegans, trying to get the word out is incredibly helpful. We are, I think this is probably also a convenient enough time to make our pitch that we are actively asking people to join as monthly donors at any amount, $1, $2, genuinely $1, $2 adds up a lot. And it shows that we are getting support from people, which is helpful when we're applying for grants and asking for larger donations. So I'll briefly pitch. We have our campaign website, yesonip28.org. You can go there, and I really do emphasize $1 or $2 a month is very helpful. You can donate anywhere. You don't have to be in Oregon. You don't even have to be a U.S. citizen to vote or to you do it to vote, but to donate to the campaign. It can actually be anyone around the world. Um, because we are not a political candidate, we are a ballot initiative. So there's opportunities for everyone to help. If you would like to possibly start something like this, definitely email me. My email is david@yesonip28.org. You could also email team@yesonip28.org. That's fine too. I would happily be able to talk and help provide resources with what we've done currently and maybe strategize doing this wherever you are. I will put the caveat that likely we would wait to, I think we would want to wait until after this election cycle, both to see whether or not it proves to be successful and to shore up enough of a base to be able to actually provide substantial resources to help people do this in their state. But I would really like to see this. So looking into whether your state has a ballot initiative process, what that might look like. Um, those are all ways that I think very specific to the campaign that people can get involved with. And if anyone is interested in learning more, getting involved in meetings, even we have hybrid meetings, feel free to join. I mean, I would really enjoy more people hopping in and contributing however they can. during this particular part of the process with signature gathering, we are sort of single-minded because that is like the main task that we're doing. Once we switch to campaigning, if and when we qualify, then we will have a lot more opportunities for people to get involved. And so, at the very least, right now, if you want to sign up, we also have our newsletter, which you can get to on our website. You'll hear updates. So if we send out a monthly newsletter, um, and that will alert you to like when we have a lot more activities that are easier for people to get involved in, like text banking, phone banking, postcard writing. We'll have a lot more social media content. Those are the things that come to mind, at least in terms of ways to help out.
Perfect. And yeah, we've put those in the comment section, your contact info and those sites, and hopefully we'll put them in the show notes as well. Certainly we encourage people to reach out to you if they want to get involved. And there's a comment I want to get your comment on,
Yeah.
which is unless we accept two items regarding the animal industrialists, we fail. So in other words, these are two areas that probably will get the most pushback if not addressed, I guess, up front. One is their bottom line is what they're going to be concerned about, right? How much money their business and
Mhm.
jobs in the
Yeah.
community. So how do you now speak to that?
Yeah, the way I would now speak to that is something I mentioned earlier, the emphasizing the farm transitions and really there's a couple of organizations. I think the more commonly well-known one, the Transformation Project, the Mercy for Animals has helped with. It's also the Farm
Okay.
Adaptation Network.
Yeah,
There's a
I
couple
interviewed
others.
Leah Garces. I interviewed Leah Garces for our podcast. Folks can go and listen to that. It's great. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
that is
Sorry.
an incredibly helpful organization and model to show that we do have ways to meet people's economic needs, to meet their need for stability in our current world um, without relying on killing animals for profit. There are alternative models of agriculture. In Oregon, we have certain crops that actually do grow pretty well here. Chickpeas, interestingly, in the Pacific Northwest are very common because they need very dry soil. And I'm not an expert, so I guess don't quote me on these things. But I was watching some videos about
Mhm.
just for my own learning to try to kind of have some more ready answers. But the most important thing for me is to open up because I don't have all the answers, and no one on our team claims to be experts in what exactly every farmer will do differently. What we want is to connect with those farmers and really try to discuss what would alternatives be that you think would meet your needs as well. And to demonstrate that, the initiative creates what we call a Humane Transition Fund and a Humane Transition Council or an Oversight Council, essentially setting up a fund, if this were to pass, that the state would be required to fund to the best of their ability to set up a grants program that can be used for things like job assistance or like job retraining, income replacement, food assistance, animal care, and anything else that's unanimously decided on by this transition council. And the council is made up of people who are impacted directly by this economically. The Farm Bureau would be on this. The representatives from the nine federally recognized tribal governments in Oregon would be on this. People from the state who specialize in job retraining would be on this. Some animal activists would be on this. A lot of people involved in this council. And the reason, again, this is a very idealistic vision, but we want to demonstrate that that is truly what we want. We want everyone sitting at a table talking about what are some alternative strategies. We don't claim to know all of them. All we know is that we want the animals' needs to be protected and we want everyone else's needs to be met at the same time. Um, so that is, we know that there are alternatives out there, and we know that there are some organizations, like some of the ones I mentioned, that specialize in those alternatives. During the campaign cycle, we would really like to have strong partnerships with those organizations so that they can actually promote the alternatives that they know best. So I want the Transformation Project to start promoting, once we are campaigning, promoting their alternatives. I want Farm Adaptation Network to be promoting alternatives. I want the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine promoting alternatives to using animals in research. I really want, there are people who have worked in New York to switch to non-lethal forms of pest control for mice and rats, birth control, essentially. I want to get people from that to talk about alternatives to lethal forms of pest control. Um, a lot of these alternatives already exist. It's just a matter of can we effectively promote them and show that they are effective at getting everyone's needs met.
Hmm, I love that so much. Really, so thorough. You are, but not reinventing the wheel. We don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. There are pieces who have people, groups that and organizations that have already existing systems and structures and things that have been successful that it can all sort of come together that way. So question, can people travel to Oregon and help collect signatures? How would that look?
Yes. Yeah, anyone can come to Oregon, collect signatures, reach out to the campaign, let us know. It's very easy. We can train you on the process. And we also might be able to help with accommodation, at least for a limited number of people, depending at a time. Um, so if you are someone interested in traveling out here to help us collect, please do. Most of us are in Portland, although we do also have a sizable team in Eugene. Although if you are trained and know what you're doing, you could travel around the state if you want and vacation and also collect signatures while you're doing that. It it's very easy to collect signatures. You don't need to be um, a resident of Oregon. You don't need to be a U.S. citizen. You don't have to be 18 to volunteer to petition. Um, as long as you have gone through the brief training process, so you know what you're doing when you're doing it, you are happy to help.
Absolutely. Rolling out the welcome mat. Again, David's contact information is here. You can find him and you're going to get a flood of inquiries. That's what we're putting out there. So I wanted to ask you a question about petitions. I mean, I know that signatures are mandatory for ballot initiatives, and are they generally a same amount of signatures state to state? And like, what do you think about petitions as standalone activism? I know that's a little off topic, but if
Yeah.
if you have a comment about like what's the most effective way to utilize petitions, do they really work?
So the signature count varies state to state. It's usually based off of some percentage of who voted, sometimes for governor, sometimes for other positions, but I think more often governor, who voted for governor in the most recent election cycle. And so in Oregon, I think it's 6% for the kinds of initiatives we're doing. Sometimes it's 8% for constitutional changes. I think those are the right numbers, although they could be slightly different. But it's some percentage of who voted for the governor in the most recent election cycle. Um, there is also sometimes requirements among some states to have a certain percentage of votes come from different counties or districts or however it's broken up. Oregon does not have one of those. They call them geographic distribution requirements often. It in Oregon, you can collect all of the signatures from one small part of the state, which we want to get people signing from as many places as possible, given the fact that it's more cost effective to stick to metro areas. That is why we do it. We have had petitioners down in Grants Pass, in Ashland, we've gone out to Bend and Salem, but most of our petitioners are from Portland and Eugene. We do acknowledge that there is real tension, especially in Oregon, but certainly elsewhere, between the urban rural divide. And I think that's gotten much more prevalent in this country. And we don't want to intentionally increase that. We do want to feel like everyone's needs matter, including people in rural Oregon. Um, and at the same time, when we're collecting signatures, the urban environments are where we live, they're where it is easiest to collect signatures. And so that is where the bulk of our signatures come from.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Interesting. I never knew any of that. That's so good to know that.
Oh,
I know nothing's random, but it's so good to know the basis for these things. Go ahead. You
yeah.
wanted to add?
Well, and I realized I didn't answer the second part of the question, which is on petitions in general. So
Yeah.
there are two main types of petitions, at least that are coming to mind, or one way to distinguish them are legally binding petitions and non-binding petitions. And so what I mean by that is if we get enough signatures for this initiative on our petition, then it will be voted on in the next election cycle. And if it passes, it will be implemented, at least in a perfect world. There are actually some states that give the legislature a little bit more authority to change what has been passed by voters. But in theory, that's the trajectory. You collect the signatures, you get on the ballot. If you win, you get implemented. For a lot of petitions that are online that anyone can sign, those are typically non-binding. So they're just to kind of show, here's a bunch of people who are interested in this, and you might send that petition to a corporation, you might send that petition to elected officials to try to pressure them, like saying, hey, there's this many people who support this. Um, for instance, Compassionate PDX was collecting signatures to support a fur ban, and the signatures weren't for a local initiative, but it was to send to city council to show this many people support this. I think there certainly can be value in having that, right? I think having a long list of people who support this is great. There is the limitation that it doesn't have to be, it can be ignored. Um, and that is definitely a real limitation that when you're doing a ballot initiative, if you are successfully able to get those signatures, there's just a legal process that has to be followed. Um, the threshold for getting those signatures is much higher, so that's the consequence. It's usually a lot more costly to run those petitions. And I think that on its own, it depends a little bit on the type of petition. I think that certainly with the non-binding ones, it has to be supplemented by some other, right? Someone is pressuring either an organization or a group of individuals who are lobbying a specific official or an entity, putting pressure on them. And this is sort of one way to supplement that pressure is through a list of names. And so that can be really helpful. I think if you just sent the list of names without much teeth behind it, I don't think people would typically respond. For our initiative, we do think that it would, on its own, at least get enough publicity initially, but I don't think it would go very far if that was the only thing we were doing, or if there weren't other parts of the movement that were benefiting from the signal that we're providing. So when I mentioned bringing in other organizations to share about those alternatives that they have, if those organizations weren't doing that, then we would, on our own, just beginning the initiative, maybe could get in conversation, but not be as well equipped to have a more productive conversation. And if we're able to get on the ballot, and if we're able to form an organization that gets it on the ballot in multiple election cycles, 2028, 2030, 2032, 2034, that can hopefully stimulate a lot more grassroots mass protests who are calling for a state amendment in their state and potentially a federal constitutional amendment. I mean, that would only happen if there are a lot of people pressuring a lot of individuals, a lot of groups, if there were more than just our initiative alone. So I think it's always going to be a group effort, but the strength of the initiative process, I think, depends a lot on the type of petition. I think that's going to have a big difference.
Nice. Yeah, that was really helpful. That was really helpful. So I think I saw that there are 26 states. Is that correct? That ha allow ballot initiatives currently? You might have to look it up as well. I did, but
I think there are
like,
some, it varies a little bit on whether it's because there's different forms. So you can have a ballot measure that adds a new law. You can also have a vote to repeal a law. And I think those actually might sometimes be called referendum in the United States, a veto referendum specifically. So that's a very specific type of initiative. It's only to repeal a current law. There's a couple states that have just that. Then there's constitutional amendments as well, and those are the bigger initiatives. So I yeah, there's somewhere around 20 something that have our specific type of initiative.
so if people want to know about their own state, is there a special resource that's better that is the best resource to go to find out the information, or should they simply Google it?
Um, for state level, Ballotpedia uh,
Okay.
is sort of a Wikipedia, but specifically for ballot election type of stuff. They have a map that's really useful. I think if you search Ballotpedia initiative process, that map will come up. That's really helpful for determining at the state level. Where it gets more complicated is understanding at the local level because some municipalities have ballot initiative processes. And so you might be able to get something maybe not elected at the state, but in your city. Like Colorado has some at the state level and at city levels. But like New York, for instance, I think they have some, I think at the local level, and also the state can refer an initiative. Like the legislators can refer something to the ballot, but the people can't petition for it to be on the ballot. So knowing all of those details can get really difficult. And it will depend on how well your state or city or county has made the process explicit on their websites. On whatever their election division is, they should have that information. Um, but I know when I was looking through at one point to do a presentation sort of on the different states, the documentation varies quite wildly. And so it can get much harder to understand the process depending on where you live.
Yeah, nice. So then would you say that researching that is like the first step? Is that what you would recommend as step one? Or is there something prior to that? Or what would be step two? I'm just
Mm.
thinking for folks who want just like one tip, one place to start the process, and besides reaching out to you as well. That might be step one, reaching out to you.
I think if you feel really if you feel like our campaign resonates, if our messaging in particular really resonates and you want something similar, reaching out to me, definitely happy to help as step one. I think even if you're inspired to do something a little different, but that involves the ballot initiative process, I'm also happy to answer questions. But then step one might be either to look into that process or to get clear what needs you're trying to meet by the initiative that you are putting forward or wanting to put forward. Because I think for me, this initiative came about because I really, really want the public to understand how I feel operating in this world where we treat companion animals really well in some respects. Not in some respects. We objectify a lot of companion animals too, but companion animals by and large are not killed in mass. And we've normalized all of these other actions that I see as animal cruelty. And I want people to talk about that. I think that would meet my own need for understanding to simply be able to have that conversation in particular, that no other kind of conversation is really going to meet that need for me. And so getting just really clear, what is it that your need is? Maybe that isn't exactly your need for understanding. Maybe it's a need for connecting in some other way. Maybe it is around a different topic that you feel really passionate about wanting understanding for. Getting that clear, because I think that's what's going to give you the momentum to keep doing it, or the energy to keep doing it. For our campaign, what a win looks like is so different than what some other campaigns would call a win because we know that this isn't going to pass in 2026, but we still feel like we're winning when we're having those conversations, when we're seeing our numbers of people involved in the campaign grow, when we are able to get that understanding met in the present moment instead of in some future moment. And so I think getting clear with that as the first step,
Mm.
and probably continuing to do it in multiple future steps. And then maybe logistically, the next first step is to look into that process in your state, because that will be a big impact, be a big factor in
Mm.
what options you have.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, first, getting clear on your why, the essence of the reason, like the overarching, foundational reason that's going to keep you going, that's going to keep you
Yeah.
getting up in the morning and keep you going and not giving up. And that yours with this initiative is get people thinking and talking about animal cruelty, get that dialogue, that conversation going. So, yeah, that's a beautiful intention. Yeah, so I don't know, David, we might wrap up in a bit here now, but is there anything we didn't cover, anything that you have forgotten or anything you wanna add?
I think the one thing that I want to plug is it's on both the website blogs that we have, and it's also a standalone piece on the EA forum if you are involved in the effective altruism movement. We posted it there as well. But there's a piece I wrote called How Can We Get the World to Talk About Animals' Inviolable Rights? And inviolable meaning we don't want anyone to violate them. We want them to be unalienable is also another word that is sometimes used for these kinds of rights. If you're really interested in the women's suffrage movement and how we are inspired by that movement for our campaign, I highly recommend reading it. It is a little, I think the forum predicts it's about an 18-minute read, so it is fairly substantial. But I wanted to at least plug it because I think it's the most substantial piece of writing from the campaign about our theory of change and what we are hoping for. But other than that, I can't think of anything else to close with. Um,
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. That's perfect. People can look up the information as well. But do you have any final words? Let's say I always ask for new activists. How
hmm.
can you instill some hope in them right now?
I went vegan in 2019. No, 2018? Not that long ago. I went vegan
You're checking the
five,
clock
6, 7.
like in 3 minutes and 28 seconds.
Yeah, it was.
So,
Yeah, no, I was trying to think of what year it was. Um, it was 5, 6, 7, 7 years ago. I went vegan. I started this campaign in 2020 because this is actually we had been going initially for the 2022 election cycle, then the 2024 election cycle. We grew to the extent that in 2026, we think we're the closest we've ever been. I mean, we've never collected this many signatures, so it has been increasing. But I started the campaign after only being vegan for a couple of years, and it's turned into something that I find quite fulfilling in a lot of ways. And what I hope is inspiring about that is it did not take very long. Um, to get as active as I have. And I have a friend, Eva Hamer, who pro Animal Future and has
yeah,
also been
yeah.
on AAC. She's often said to me, because she was vegan for a long time. I forget exactly when she went vegan, but she was vegan for a long time. And she said, when I mentioned that I hadn't been vegan very long, something I won't get the words as well as she put, but that it was cool that there are people out there who might not even be vegan yet, who in 5 years might be starting
Yeah.
a campaign like this, right? I mean, it's just something that it can happen, and it can happen seemingly spontaneously, and you don't have to have been vegan for a long time to get involved. Um, just staying connected to those needs and finding a community, I think will be the most maybe that's actually really step one is trying to find a community as best one can. Although I can't say I took that as an advice. I think I started the initiative and then built the community around the initiative.
Uh,
Um, whatever strategy works, but hopefully that's inspiring that it really doesn't take as much time as it thinks people think.
that really is. Your journey is an example that a lot can happen in a short amount of time. Really, truly, it's about the quality of your actions, jumping in there. So I think that does inspire and I just want to, as we end, I want to thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all your efforts and please know that AAC will support you and keep people posted um, on how it's going and how it's unfolding. So thank you
Awesome.
so
I
much for that. Yeah. All
I
right.
appreciate that a lot.
Thank you, David, so much. So again, in closing, get in touch with David with any questions or to get involved. And as we wrap up, for as little as $2 a month, please consider becoming a Patreon by finding AAC on Patreon. Your donations allow AAC to continue to provide free educational resources for activists, which ultimately saves more animals. If you're interested in becoming a mentor or mentee or want to get involved, please visit our website. Please hit subscribe here on our channel and give us a like. And this is a global historical movement. So thank you all for your tireless work wherever you are in the world. Keep going. Everyone is needed, and every action counts to achieve animal liberation. Right? And until next time, stay strong, get active, and live vegan. AAC signing off. Bye, y'all.